So let me start recording. Just to let you know, this webinar is recorded as well. We try to put it onto our channel later on. Welcome to our second China workshop in 2020. Our first workshop compared the management of the COVID-19 crisis in China and the US 2 weeks ago. Today, we are going to talk about China's Belt and Road Initiative in Latin America and the case of Brazil. Let me introduce you to our working group first. It is part of the International Initiative for Promoting Political Economy, EP. The focus of our working group is to research and discuss the question of what type of socio-economic system exists in China, and to assess the trajectory and dynamics of change and development, both as in a historical and contemporary sense. Today, we have Professor Elias Jabbour talking on China in Latin America, particularly in Brazil. Professor Jabbour is a professor of theory and politics of economic planning at the School of Economics of the State University of Rio de Janeiro. He is also a professor at the Postgraduate Program in Economic Sciences and at the International Relations. He has written a few books and dozens of academic and opinion articles. The most recent one is on the Journal of Economic Issues about Chinese catching up. Back to our topic today, China's flagship project Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, aims to promote so-called mutual benefit in its overseas investments, but it has been subject to intense scrutiny and even suspicion. For countries which need capital investments in infrastructure and export trade to support internal accumulation, does BRI pose a debt trap or opportunity? How do we analyze these new developments? Professor Jabbour approaches these questions through a theoretical analysis of China's political economy, particularly on China's economic planning, and explain why it is important to understand the launch of BRI in this context. He will then talk about the dynamics of Chinese investments in Latin America and the geopolitical tensions attached to this dynamic. And finally, he will talk about the relations between Brazil and China and the current political economic situation in Brazil. He will join by Marxist economist Michael Roberts after the presentation. I believe many of our audience today, like myself, are followers of Michael Roberts' blog. The blog provides timely and important analysis of world events from a Marxist perspective. Michael is also author of a few books, including The Long Depression and World in Crisis. After their discussion, we will open the floor to the audience. You can put your questions in the Q&A box anytime. The box can be found at the bottom of your screen. If time allows, we will also invite those who would like to ask the questions in person to speak. If you would like to do so, please raise your hand using the palm icon. Without further ado, I will pass it to our speaker today, Professor Elias Jabbour.
Hello, good morning to the Brazilians, good afternoon to the British. I would like to thank Sanki and Professor Dikilo to invite me to give this presentation. I'm honored to be being among professors like Dikilo and Mike Roberts and others. And yesterday we had a little 10 minutes debate between me and Sanki and Michael Roberts. It was a good opportunity to know this great human and Marxist thinker, Michael Roberts. As proposed, I will do a 30 minutes presentation. But before talking about the Belt and Road Initiative, please allow me to begin the presentation with some reflections on Chinese market socialism. Wait a moment. Let's direct it to slide here. Okay. In recent years, based in my research agenda, and I'm sorry. Thank you, Fernanda. No. That's okay. In recent years, based in my research agenda and the studies, I have formed opinion on the Chinese development process. In my point of view, the Chinese development process must be observed over the last 4 decades. It's not something that can be explained on its own. Maybe it's a process whose capacity for theoretical interpretation, either from the current orthodox or heterodox approach, may have already reached their limits. This limitation is due to 3 objective facts interconnected. The first historical fact, the transformation of market socialism into a new socio-economic formation. My research hypothesis, in sum, in 78, emerged in China the first experience of a new class, of a new socio-economic formation, what I call the modern market socialism. The Vietnam is the second case. The emergence of this new socio-economic formation results from successive waves of institutional innovations that made it possible for several modes of production to coexist in the same socio-economic formation. The dominant one being headed by public socialist economic sector. When I speak on waves of institutional innovation, I speak on creation of political conditions to, for example, the emergence of a new forms of properties and key institutions. For instance, during the 90s, 2 waves of institutional innovations created the political and institutional conditions for the 2 key elements of modern market socialism. The first element, the emergence of a powerful state-owned financial system. And the second key element, my point of view, the reorganization of the state sector and the advent of the more or less 100 large state-owned business conglomerates. These two elements are the key elements of the market socialism and the elements that the Chinese particularity, okay? The second historical fact, the advent of new and higher forms of economic planning in China. I believe that these new and higher forms of economic planning is the soul of Chinese market socialism. China's industrial policies in the current century have become more proactive in terms of producing endogenous innovations with a constant search for state-of-the-art in terms of technical development. The emergence and corporatization of the large state-owned business conglomerates placed at the forefront of technical progress, and the management of new and higher forms of planning that is noticeable in the incorporation of this technical progress in the real economy. On the advent of a new and higher forms of economic planning, there are many examples. The first example that I expose here, the case of high-speed railway, is exemplary in that China has reached the frontiers technology. Not only the case of high-speed railway as example of higher and superior form of economic planning. During the pandemics, the utilizations of platforms like the 5G, artificial intelligence, and big data was fundamental for confronting the pandemic and now the economic recovery. I believe that when I spoke on the new and higher forms of economic planning, that China's now in this moment operating a Copernican revolution in the management of productive process. In debate, we can deeper this point. The third fact, historical fact. I will speak something. I spoke something on the planning and their different historical forms in China. In other words, I speak about socialism and their historical forms. For example, one historical form of economic planning was the central planning, linked with the Soviet model of development. The second historical form of economic planning is the market-based planning. Nowadays, dominant in China is this form of economic planning. But China is living now a transition between the economic planning form. Now, in the last years, emerged in China's what I call the project-based planning. It would be the superior stage, not only economic planning. It's a highest stage of market socialism. In sum, I think that we must find a new conceptual framework to understand this stage of development reached by China and socialism. There is don't exist now economy, political economy of market socialism. In my point of view, we must find a new conceptual framework, a new categorical framework to better understand this process. During the debate, we can go deeper about that. About the Belt and Road Initiative, an overview. That's a global infrastructure strategy launched in 2013. In fact, it's not just a big infrastructure investment plan. It's a Chinese proposal for globalization based in 5 points, in internal 5 points. The great productive forces developed in the country is the first point. The second point, the deep monetary sovereignty achieved after decades. The fourth point, I'm sorry, the third point, sovereignty activity after decades of accumulating foreign exchange reserves. The third point, the practicing active monetary policies. The fourth, investment rates above 40% of GDP since the early 2000s. And also the 5 point, the formation of a complex and deep long-term financial system. Until now, 136 countries and about 30 international organizations have signed some kind of cooperation document with Belt and Road Initiative, which shows a mark of the present time, the growing Chinese gravitation power. It would be the multi-trillion-dollar web of infrastructure, the investments between $4 and $8 trillion until 2049. A fundamental characteristic of our time is the fact that most of the planned investments in Belt and Road Initiative are financed by state-owned banks. This characteristic is not a fact in itself. it demonstrates that the Chinese actually present to the world an alternative to financialization. Nowadays, the strength of Chinese socialism in the world lies in precisely in this Chinese capacity to undertake immense investment based on state production and financial basis. Now, the Belt and Road Initiative in Latin America. Since the beginning of the present century, economic relations between China and Latin America have grown quickly and focused mainly in trade. In about a decade, China has become the largest trading partner of several countries in the region. To a large extent, this relates to the pattern and path of recent China development, a process in which urbanization and industrialization relies on highly intensive use of mineral, metallic, and energy commodities. China's demand for commodities has affected Latin American countries both directly and indirectly, given its effect on international price. The establishment in China of an industrial structure with a strong capacity in a range of industrial sectors and the fast penetration in the imports structure of Latin American countries have resulted in a typically inter-industrial trade pattern with export to China heavily concentrated in basic products and with increasing imports of a basket of different manufactured products. Many South America this is the slide of trade balance between China and Latin America. For example, on this figure, many South American nations, especially heavy commodity exporters like Peru, Chile, and Brazil, have had positive trade balances with China for the last decade. Argentina's balance had been trending downward to a record low last year as a major drought hit their agricultural exports, but it bounced back into positive territory in 2019. Other countries like Mexico and Colombia have had negative and worsening merchandise trade balance with China over the past decade. 2000 and the last year saw a continuation of this trend. These figures show the decreasing China share of Latin American export by technology in during the last 20 years. We export to China basically primary products, and only 2% of our exportations to China is manufactured products. It's very bad to us that this situation, of course. This is a graphic. This figure shows the technology distribution for Latin American exports by destination. The export to China, more than half is of our export is China. In other hand, the only 27. I don't see here. I can't see here the. Okay, here the primary, more than half of our export to China is primary products. In comparison with other destinations, rest of the world, only 27% of our exports for rest of the world is basically primary. And this figure show the difference between our basket of exportation in comparison China and rest of the world. And we have with China's a very primary based a place to accept our products. It's not a good thing, of course. on the investments, China's new greenfield investments, you can observe here in this figure. In comparison to other source of greenfield foreign direct investments, Chinese greenfield investments in Latin America was more heavily concentrated in extraction and processing, particularly because of Xinjiang TBAA Group announcement of a lithium project in Bolivia, in conjunction with Bolivia State-owned Lithium Development Corporation, ILB. As the Bolivian government has changed since this deal was announced, the project is currently receiving renewed scrutiny under Bolivia's far-right government. Now Bolivia is governed by a far-right government. In strategical terms, the reliance on heavy trade in commodities, relying on commodity trade alone is counterproductive in the long term. Of course, the commodity boom may have contributed not only to infrastructure investments and payment balance, but to more basket options to Latin America. If these are not used for, the problem is, these are not used for industrial development. The economy will suffer in the long run as the terms of trade tend to run against primary commodities over time. It's evident that Latin American countries are suffering from what structuralist economists call debt disease. In other words, the inflow of dollars from our export leads to an appreciation of our exchange rate. The problem is not China in itself. The problem, the fundamental problem for Latin American country is the lack of the political strategy that uses Chinese investment as means of promoting our industrialization, not the contrary. In my point of view, I believe that we must do the same what the Chinese did with the capitalist countries in the last 40 years. In financial terms, this map is very interesting. China has made more than 140 billion in loan commitments to countries in the region since 2005. In 2018, the lowest totaled more than 7.7 billion, the first annual increase in 3 years, according to a database maintained by the Inter-American Dialogue in Washington, D.C. and Boston University Global Development Policy Center in Massachusetts. As you can see in the maps, Venezuela has been the largest recipient with $67.2 billion, much of it for the oil industry, followed Brazil, Ecuador, and Argentina. Energy is by far the biggest target of investments, of loans, at 96.9 billion, followed by infrastructure, which received 25.99 billion. China is now Latin America's second largest trading partner and the region is the second largest recipient of Chinese overseas investments. Whether these projects involve a river dredging operation in Peru or power transmission in Guyana, what the groups say they are stonewalled when they try to get information from Chinese companies and their own government about projects. I want to speak now on geopolitical implications of Chinese presence in Latin America. In general terms, the Chinese rise demonstrates the existence of alternative development dynamics to neoliberalism, in comparison to neoliberalism. For example, I often say that Brazil was the best student of the Washington Consensus and has been my country impoverishing since the early 90s. China, on the contrary, was the worst student of the Washington Consensus and has been reaching since the end of the 70s. Latin America was the region where neoliberal recommendations were most violently applied. The challenges to the neoliberal order caused a progressive wave in Latin America in last decade, with the election of leftist governments in large and important countries such as Brazil, Venezuela, Argentina, Ecuador, etc. At the same time, China emerged on the international scene as a potential commercial partner, not only commercial partner, but political actor capable of replacing the agencies controlled by imperialism in relation with the peripheral countries. I referred by International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, China's is alternative. Is an alternative. In a context in which imperialism turned its attention to the Middle East, China became a major recipient of goods produced in Latin America, creating conditions for countries like Venezuela and Bolivia to carry out great internal social reforms. On the other hand, Brazil started to compose the BRIC and played a relevant role in the reconfiguration of global power. The project of American power in South America region is secular and geopolitical priority for its economic and security strategy. In addition to other factors, this tactic seeks to shift world conflicts to the north-south axis, the establishment of a limited sovereignty system, technological apartheid on developing countries, the impositions of economic policies that lead to recession, the industrialization, and reprimarization, and precarious work, and the dismantling of the armed forces in development countries. Currently, the USA has made use of several expedients in Latin America countries that have recently strengthened ties with China. The example of the attempted economic destruction of Venezuela and the military coup in Bolivia are extreme examples of attempts by United States imperialism to retake the reins of power in Latin America. New modalities of power dispute are based on unlimited and restricted and asymmetric wars under the influence of the information age and technological informations composing complex scenarios and diffuse configurations, indirect interventions from the perspective of coercion that aim to apply soft and rigid blows. In this characterization of the hybrid war, the objectives would be to destroy the political power of opponents through physical and moral collapse, destabilizing and overthrowing aligned governments through unofficial forces. My country, Brazil, is under a hybrid war since 2013. Bolsonaro election is a product of an intense hybrid war against my country. The last point here is the case of Brazil. Brazil touched me a lot. I love my country too much. I am a patriotic militant Brazil, and I suffered a lot because of our situation. Yes, Brazil is an original case study. Between 1913 and 1918, alongside the Soviet Union and Japan, Brazil's average growth rate was the highest in the world. The structural transformation was so rapid and profound that we can say that Brazil left the Middle Age in 13 and interage in contemporary age in 80s. From, for example, for 47 and 18, during the import substitution industrialization era, the average growth rate was 6.5% per year. And manufacturing was even higher at 8.6% per year. We became the 7th largest economy in the capitalist world. The country didn't resist, but the country didn't resist the oil crisis of 79 and imperialism in the 80s used our foreign debt top pressure to, for example, adopt the neoliberalism. Economic policy choices made since the 90s reflect a country colonized by bureaucrats from International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Brazil becoming, as I spoke now, Brazil becoming the best, here, please, best student of the Washington Consensus. And the result was the complete reversal of intense industrialization process seen during 15 years. A coup d'etat against Dilma Rousseff in 2016 and the election of Jair Bolsonaro placed Brazil at the center of North American geopolitics game in Latin America. Now on relations between Brazil and China. It's interesting to note that Brazil and China relations deepening is the figure 5 shows in all its aspects during the Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff governments. It was a relationship which has been far beyond trade and investment relationship. The truth is in the whole. It was a political relationship with a strategic nature. Beside China, Brazil was an active actor during the build of the current trend towards multipolarity. The example of the BRICS and their financial instruments, such as the New Development Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, is perhaps the most important initiative to oppose the imperialist order in the world. I have no doubt that the relations between Brazil and China during the Workers' Party government was the centerpiece of the hybrid war waged by imperialism against my homeland. Speaking in commercial terms, quickly China became our main partner, but the list of imports and exports reflects a vicious cycle between a country that exports raw materials the figure 6 show the relationship between primary export and the industrial export to China, the primary and the industrialized export, Brazilian export to China. Can you see in 2015, Brazil 18% of Brazilian products in China was primary products. The reason of this trade distortion and Brazil imports from China is other thing. The reason for this trade distortion is not an alleged Chinese imperialism. The reason for this trade distortions is not Chinese imperialism, yes. In fact, Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff failed to overcome the institutional arrangement that supports neoliberalism in Brazil. A combination between open capital accounts and rigid annual inflation targets, destroying our industrial capacity, and even the industrial policies launched during this period have not been implemented in the face of mistaken macroeconomic arrangements. A consumption-led growth is not sufficient to feed our industrialization. On the contrary, 2 points. Our demand was capitulated by, for example, Chinese and South Korean companies. In fact, there was explicit contradiction between government policies in Brazil during the Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff governments and the direction of monetary policy controlled by the Central Bank of Brazil. The Central Bank of Brazil, since the launch of the real plan, the Plano Real, is an institution controlled by the interests of the Brazilian financial system. The dynamics of relations between Brazil and China cannot be understood without understanding the internal Brazilian political dynamics. I will come into finish my presentation. During the debate, we can speak something on the formula for the Chinese investment in Brazil. But now we need to go to final. And Brazil now lives a dichotomy. Since the 2016 coup d'etat, the relations between Brazil and China have been characterized by a dichotomy. In one hand, China has advanced on the Brazilian market through and increased both in productive investments and through merger acquisitions. You can observe after 2016 the dynamics of Chinese investments in Brazil. These mergers and acquisitions encouraged by an ultra-liberal and anti-national stance of the Temer and Bolsonaro governments. On the other hand, the automatic alignment of Brazilian government becomes a major obstacle to the construction of a national development strategy. Thus, in spite of a profound anti-communist and anti-Chinese rhetoric, Brazil deepens its dependence of Chinese market. This figure 9 Brazilian exports by destination in April of this year. 43% of our exports go to China, for example. Brazil deepens the dependence of Chinese market for our products. For example, the last 3 months, Brazilian exports of primary products to China increased by 30%. I finish my presentation here expressing my concern for destinies of my country and my people. Thank you too much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Jabbour, for the very informative presentation, covering a wide range of issues and providing both theoretical and also empirical readings of the topic today. I know Michael Roberts has got quite a lot of questions prepared, and he has read through the papers and also the recommended readings. So I will pass it over to Michael now. Please fire away, Michael.
Well, thank you everybody for inviting me, and thank you very much, Professor Jabbour, for an instructive talk, not only about the Brazil situation economically, and its relationship with China, much of which I did not know in any detail at all. And Elias has provided information which I think we can all digest and use, but also on trying to understand the nature of the Chinese economy and why its relationship with Brazil is the way it is. So what I want to do in my brief few minutes of comments and discussion as discussant here is, first of all, just take a few moments to think about the nature of the Chinese economy, pose some questions and points for everybody here to discuss, and not only at this Zoominar, but at future. And then a few minutes about the question of China's international trade and investment activity, and what is the nature of that? How can we describe it? To do that, I'm just going to present you a few graphs, if I can get them up. Just get the slideshow going. Here we go. So, two parts I want to talk about on China and Brazil. And the first thing is to talk about the points very early on that Professor Jabbour made. Elias referred to the question of modes of production, and also the question of considering China as taking a new social economic formation. So is China a capitalist mode of production? In my view, it's not, because the public ownership is dominant. There's a planning mechanism in operation. The capitalists were expropriated. The landlords were expropriated. Their military leaders ended up in Formosa and Taiwan. And we had a regime in China which adopted the policy on adopted a structure primarily of common ownership, particularly of agriculture, but also industry, and later on finance. And the facts are clear. And if you look at the right-hand graph here that I presented, you can see that this is taken from the International Monetary Fund's public sector stock database. And you can see that China has a massive size in relation to GDP of public stocks. Its public stock level is 3 times larger than its GDP. That is nowhere near matched by any other country apart from Japan, which is fairly close, so 1.5 to 1.3. And then if you look at the other countries, both the rival country, peer country like India on the right, it's way lower. And of course, when we get down to Russia, which used to be Soviet Union and a publicly owned non-capitalist economy, we can see the transformation has taken place there, which also justifies the view that Russia is no longer had the mode of production, is now a dominant capitalist mode of production, in my view. So the question then is whether we're just dealing with a mode of production, or, as Professor Jabbour argues, that we've also got a different social economic formation compared to the Soviet Union, which was mainly a centralized planning economy with very little private sector activity. Of course, there was some. No stock market, no big capitalist firms, no real development of the market in any particular way. Therefore, it is a different economic formation in China. So the question there, he says, this he would like to call market socialism, but market socialism is not state capitalism, as if you want to describe Korea and Taiwan, where the majority of the means of production and finance are owned by the private sector, although there's a sizable state sector, and there's been a lot of state direction in the development of Taiwan and Korea in the past. So here we have a view that the capitalist mode of production does not operate in China, but also it's different from the Soviet Union, that it has a different social economic formation, which Elias wants to call market socialism. Well, you could say what's in a name. The important thing is what do we understand by this? If you want to look at the capitalist view, we get the view, for example, from Branko Milanovic, that he's just written a book in which he says there's no socialism, there's no non-capitalist economy in the world. There's only two sorts of capitalism. There's the liberal capitalism, which is apparent in the United States, the UK, and the G7. Don't know how liberal he actually thinks that might be. Or there's political capitalism. So in some ways, in China, we have a political dictatorship through the Communist Party operating capitalism, which is not much dissimilar from another view of state capitalism that the Soviet Union is, or China is, or China Soviet was, or China is now. But it is different. Both of those, I think, from what Professor Jabbour is saying, is that no, China is neither political capitalism nor state capitalism. It's a market socialism. It's socialism because of public ownership and the planning mechanism that is dominant in that economy. And the capitalists, although they exist, are not hegemonically in control of the economy and the political structures. But there's a wider size of market and capitalist sector which hasn't existed in previous non-capitalist economies. The Chinese like to call it a socialism with Chinese characteristics. I prefer possibly to call it a planned economy with Chinese characteristics, because I'm not convinced that we should use the word socialism in a country where the majority of the economy is publicly owned, at least directed and publicly owned. The assets and the state directs most activities. On the other hand, China has the biggest number of billionaires in the world apart from the United States. So we have a contradictory, it appears, mode of production and sizable capitalist sector. And we can argue, therefore, that we have two modes of production in coexistence or antagonism, I will argue. But the thing here is that it's not an abstraction. We mustn't just say, what is the situation? Can we measure it just abstractly or theoretically? We also have to look at historically, as Professor Jabbour does in his works, that in 1949, there was a revolution that expropriated the capitalists. It transformed the position differently from Japan, Taiwan, and Korea. And in 1978, we had a change of policy in China towards restoring the market, but without letting capitalist class get hegemonic control. So you could call it a Chinese new economic policy. If you want to call it a new social economic formation, that's something we could discuss, but it's certainly a new economic policy that was adopted after 78. So China, in my view, is not capitalism, but it's also not socialism yet, maybe never, because we do not have the complete transformation of a society on the basis of production for use. We do not have, we have a position where there's a sizable capitalist sector operating to produce profitability, and even the state sector is organized in some ways to try and make some profits if it can. But we have a sizable capitalist sector in China, and it can't be denied that it's actually got larger. So we have two modes of production coexisting, but also antagonistic, not just coexisting. They're in opposition. In this dialectical process, you cannot continue in this situation indefinitely. Maybe it will last decades, maybe a century, I don't know. But the process is dialectical. The process of the battle between the planning mechanism and the law of value and production for exchange is not settled in China, and the issue remains to be resolved. So we have China, which is not capitalist, but it's not socialist. People find sometimes that difficult. Which is it? Is the cat white? Is the cat black? Well, as Deng once said, no, it's not a question of the color of the cat, it's the process that's going on. And he's right in this sense that the process has not been resolved. Is China moving towards capitalism? Well, if you look at this left-hand scale here, this is back to the IMF data. The public sector stock to GDP ratio for China is measured here in green bars, and you can see that it's very, very high, but it has been slipping since about 2000, since China entered the World Trade Organization and so on. And the rise in the in the ratio going to the private sector stock is dramatically increasing. Up to 2011, it's even higher. So in some ways, we are increasingly moving towards a position where the private sector, the capitalist sector, has a sizable share of the total investment stock in China, and therefore is coming in my view, into antagonistic opposition to the public sector and state control. And that has to be resolved at some point. The right-hand graph shows to you that if the capitalist sector is getting more dominant, it's going to weaken the ability of the capitalist, of the Chinese economy to grow and expand, because the Marx's law of value, Marx's law of profitability applies to the capitalist sector, and that means over time, the profitability of the capitalist sector is always under pressure. There is a falling rate of profit in China, in the capitalist sector, just as there are in major capitalist economies. And that's reached a relatively low level in the recent period. So that is part of the reason why China's growth rate has also begun to decline in the recent period. Not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons. But China is clearly a distinctive economy compared to others. Just remind ourselves, Professor Jabbour said Brazil in the 50s and 60s was the fastest growing economy in the world. Well, actually, from the period of the late 50s up until the reforms of 1978, China also grew at a dramatic rate, anything between 6 to 8% a year. And from 1978 up until now, certainly up until the end of the 20th century, it was growing in double digits in real GDP and in labour productivity. Since the slowdown in the world economy, it's still been growing faster than anywhere else in the world. And as we're, even before the COVID pandemic and the slowdown in 2019, China was still growing at 6% a year, way faster than any other country apart from India in those last few years. So China is a distinctly different country, an economy. So I would say to those who say that China is capitalist, then they have to explain to us, why is this one capitalist economy so fantastically better than every other economy in the world in terms of growth, production, investment, employment, taking 800 million people out of poverty levels at World Bank levels? No other capitalist economy, emerging economy, has achieved that. Brazil has not achieved it. India has not achieved it. Russia has not achieved it. None of the other BRICS, South Africa has certainly not achieved it. There is something going on in China which makes it very different from capitalist economies and really can't be described as such. And COVID is a good example. This graph shows you in the top right-hand corner, if you look at the graph on the left, you can see the cumulative deaths per million, starting from 0 down to 700. That's cumulative deaths during COVID over the last 6 to 8 months. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner, Spain is the worst in terms of cumulative deaths, followed by wonderful United Kingdom. And you can also see that the growth drop in the second quarter of this year for these countries is between 20 and 25%. Massive. Now let's go to the other scale. We find China has had virtually no deaths, three per million is the actual figure, and yet is now in the second quarter of 2020 actually growing. No other country has achieved that, unless you want to include Vietnam, whose structure of its economy is very similar to China's. Where is India, by the way? Well, let me say, where is Brazil? I can tell you where Brazil is. Brazil is right down there with the United States and Sweden, with coming on 600 deaths per million and a GDP loss of around about the same as the United States. Where is India? Well, India has got quite a low death rate at the moment. It's up here, if you can see the top left, but it's actually here in terms of decline in GDP. It's off the scale, right over there. So it's a huge outlier there. The one big outlier in the positive terms is China on this scale. That again demonstrates to me we have a different sort of economy than those who claim that China is capitalist. Now, getting onto the international scale, and I'll speed up to finish now and my discussion points here. In my view, China is not imperialist. Professor Jabbour has made a number of points about the role of China's investments and trade in Brazil and Latin America, and pointed out that the size of China's investments and its size of it and weight of its place in trade in Latin America and in lending and so on, and also in its main emphasis on country products and rather than manufacture and industrialization, is not due to China extracting profits from Latin America and Brazil in some sort of exploitive process that we see with the imperialist powers, which are precisely operating that way. It's more to do with the fact that these Latin American countries are unable to expand and industrialize and raise their technology and their productivity of labor. But look, just look at this figure. This is the net primary income flows every year in and out of different countries. And if you've got a positive primary income flow, which the United States has and the UK has hugely, you'd be up on the plus line above this zero line here. But all the peripheral third world, global south economies are all below the line. So they're having, their flows are going out towards the imperialist countries more than those coming in. And you can see China is one of those. In fact, China's outflow on net primary income flows is very high. So China in no way is extracting income flows in terms of profit, interest, dividends, and so on from other countries. On the whole, that is going back in the other direction in China, just as it is in South Africa, India, Russia, and so on. And then here is a measure that Kalkadi and I have been working on in terms of our work on imperialism. We've looked at the transfer of value between different countries. We've measured in value terms. So trade between two countries, bilateral trade, results in a transfer of value one way or the other. China is not gaining from its trade surplus with the US for the transfer of value to China. Quite the reverse. The US is extracting a huge amount of value in its trade with China to the tune of $40 or $50 billion of the year. I could show you the Brazil situation with the US, and it's similar. China is no different than Brazil in terms of the transfer of value. So the point I'm making here, everybody, is that two things. China is a different economy than we've seen with other economies, the other BRICS and the other major developing economies, and it's proven in its results, and it's proven in its relationship to other trading partners and investment partners. And I think Professor Jabbour has explained to us very well the role in which China has with Brazil and confirms that general thesis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. This is another excellent presentation. We are just so privileged today to have both of you here on this very important subject. Even though we only try to focus on Belt and Road Initiative, but actually, is China an imperialist country? That is in the back of the mind of everyone who watches this. So I think you guys provide a very good argument to counter this. Just wanted to ask Professor Jabbour, do you want to come back quickly regarding the point raised by Michael before we go to the Q&A session?
Yes, of course. Thank you too much, Michael Roberts. I will now put something on market socialism in China and the process after 78. Of course, the historical process, the Chinese historical process of the transition to socialism began in 49, of course, but the 78 emerged in China a new class of the first experience of a new class of socio-economic formations that I call, which I call a market socialism. I want to put here, the market socialism is a fantasy name. I have a great agreement with Michael Roberts that it's not possible market socialism, but market socialism is a concept that we can observe the unity of country. The market is and socialism in the same formation, and capitalism and socialism, but the dominant is socialist mode of production. It's not only mode of production. The political power the political power is essential to understand the nature of a mode of production. It's not possible why the China is not capitalist? Because China have a lot of billionaires, but the billionaires is not a class in itself. The billionaires is part of a whole of Chinese economy, Chinese private investors, but they don't accumulate power sufficient to asking for the political power. China, the private sector of economy is not the main sector of economy. In my research, I discovered the China launched since 78 many more or less 4 or 5 waves of institutional innovation. In each institutional innovation, the state power growing qualitatively, while the private sector growth quantitatively. Of course, now the private sector in China is very, very bigger than state-owned enterprise sector in number of companies. But the private sector in China now is too dependent of the spillover effects of state-owned companies. Not only that, the private sector is dependent of the financial sector of economy, the state-owned financial sector. In other hand, is a new socio-economic formation. Is other thing that is in the past Soviet Union is older socio-economic formation, socialist too, but the older nature, like North Korea is a socialist country with an older socio-economic formation. In Cuba too. The second experience of this new class of socio-economic formation is the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. Another thing, in other hand, I present a question to us now. That's possible. That's possible. But a frontier between the state sector of economy and the private sector economy in a country like China? This is a great question. In my point of view, is very difficult to comprehend the Chinese reality now. If we want to put, if we separate here the state sector, beside the state sector is a private sector. Another side of economy, there is 5 million people working in agriculture. Is a whole. Is a whole where all sectors of economy are directly or indirectly controlled by states. This is the Chinese nature, the Chinese characteristic. In other hand, too, increased in the last years, the control by Communist Party, the private sector is under control of Communist Party of China. In each private enterprise must be one CEO represent the Communist Party in the enterprise. This is a new thing. It's a new occurrence that we must to pay attention when we call the Chinese capitalism or socialism. I don't think so. I don't think so. In China launched in 78 a new economic policy, a Leninist new economic policy with Chinese characteristics, because the the NEP was not a strategy of development. The NEP was a reply to a very specific circumstances in Russia at that time. In order, while in the China, the Chinese NEP is a strategy of development. It's very different, the two things. On the China is socialist or a capitalist. We need to, like Michael Roberts exposed, we must have a dialectical way of think this question. Dialectical and a historical way to think this question. The transition between the primitive commune to feudalism was 2,000, 3,000 years, the transition between primitive commune to feudalism. From feudalism to capitalism, another 2,000 years, okay? The capitalism, the industrial capitalism emerged more or less 3 centuries ago. The capitalism is in this sense, is a new mode of production. And socialism have only 1 century, 100 years, the age of socialism. So socialism now is a embryonic, primitive, in experimental phases. It's not a full socialism, the socialism what I dream and they know. It's the socialism in a concrete situation in the world where the capitalism is the dominant mode of production. When I spoke on the historical forms of economic planning and historical forms of socialism, I want to spoke that don't exist a mode of socialist mode of production ready now. With institutions developed, the economy, laws of motions discovered, the political institutions developed. No. China, for example, is the most advanced, the socialist experience now, is find a way for itself to socialism. Why China is socialist? Because China have a public sector of economy, dominant in economy, is one thing, but it's not the main characteristic. The political power is the central to understand China today, because the trend in China today is towards a superior forms of society organization now. It's not a capitalism, but it's not a full socialism. Understand me? And to finish this presentation, I spoke the market socialism. Sankey is a fantasy name. In my point of view, the scientific name of socialism in China today is new projectment economy. Is older historical form of economic planning and socialism today, nowadays. This is my observations. The law of failure is not is impossible to overcome in the first stage of socialism. Marx was very clear about that, about the relationship between law of value in socialism. Thank you too much.
Thank you, Professor Jabbour, for your feedback. And I just wanted to remind our audience that, yeah, we are now open for Q&A. We got 2 questions in the Q&A box. I will read them out, and but I have my question now. Can I ask the first question from myself first? Both Professor Jabbour and Mike Roberts talk about the planning mechanism in China, and it is actually quite convincing that there is planning in the Chinese economy. But if we see that it's successful within developing China's national development, what about its impact on the rest of the world? Because with the presentation from Professor Jabbour, we see that the trade between China and Brazil is largely reflecting what a core and peripheral economies, the trade pattern. Brazil is exporting primary resources while importing manufactured goods from China. Whether or not this is a different mode of production in China, for the people in Brazil, what they could see or what they can feel is actually pretty much the same with other advanced economies, the trading relationship. And they don't really feel that the planning economy in China have much to do with them or improving their living conditions or improving the social economic situation in Brazil, for example. So what do you think about this? What is your feedback on this? Because whether China is a planned economy or new form of socioeconomic formation, it doesn't seem to like have an impact to the other parts of the world. And do you want to speak about this and whether this would force China to change the trajectory, or if they continue to be successful in the way that they have managed themselves, would it be just China benefiting from this and not the others? I will read the other questions that is in the Q&A box as well, so we can answer all these questions together. First of all is an anonymous question. Great presentations regarding BRI Brazilian port, very helpful, and the soy. Now iron ore to diversify historical supply lines. 2018 fiber optic cable now links to the West Africa port. Leaky port now functional. Also linked to Portugal. Sorry, this is not a very structured sentencing. So please comment how long before Bio-Ocean Rail is built to link east to west, Peru already being developed. Okay. The other questions from Reed. Does the extension of the BRI to Latin America since 2018 represent a significant change in China's relations with the region, or is it just a continuation of existing patterns? What is the significance of the fact that the 4 largest countries in Latin America have not signed BRI memorandums of understanding? Okay. Right. Can I pass it to, both of you, please?
Professor Michael?
Yeah, well, just a few words on the Brazil manufacturing primary goods China trade, or Latin America in general, I think. First, let's say the manufacturing deficit applies also to the G7 economies with China, because China is now a manufacturing powerhouse worldwide. And while Germany may be exporting its cars and other countries exporting other electrical goods and so on, China is by far the biggest manufacturing exporter now, beating the United States, and is increasingly doing so in the higher technology areas as well, which of course is the reason for the attempts by US administration and future ones as well to try and strangle China's technology and trade prowess over the next couple of decades. The US-China rivalry is going to be very big. So in that sense, the fact that China's exports to Latin America on manufacturing are higher value added, while Latin America's exports to China are raw materials and lower value added primary goods is two things. Partly a product of the fact that China is a massive manufacturing power, as I've said, and partly, as Professor Jabbour said, is that actually capitalism in Latin America has failed to structure and take the productive forces, industrialize, develop high tech as China has done, and is having been in a position where it could have done so, according to what Elias was saying back in the 50s and 60s, they can totally failed since then. And as he said, they've become a complete subservient to imperialism through the Washington Consensus and so on. So they have just become like other countries of the global South, operating to provide cheap raw materials, destroying the nature and the environment of Latin America in the process to do so, and having all that extracted in terms of profit and in products by big multinational companies from the global north. So the short answer to the question is the Brazilian people may think that China is just like the United States and as another exploiter, but actually it's a process. If they look more closely, they would see that actually it's the failure of Brazilian capitalism to develop, and the fact that there's nowhere else to go if you want cheap manufactures. You're going to get them from China over any other country on the whole.
Let's go. I don't understand if I don't know if I understand all questions, but I will reply something on economic planning, the Chinese model to the world, the relationship between China, Belt and Road Initiative in Latin America, and the railway between Atlantic and Pacific. Yeah, something.
You know more about those things than me, Professor.
Yeah. Your English is very fast. You're speaking very fast. But I promise, I swear, and the next time when I come back here, I will improve my English. And
apologies if you did not understand my reply, but as I'm saying, China's manufacturing, and actually the G7 economies are exploiting Brazil and Latin America for their raw materials. There is nothing new about that. I didn't answer the other two questions raised by the participants because you know much more about the position on ocean activity and railways and things of that sort in the BRI.
Okay. I want to begin these replies speaking on a task that I studying a lot is the economic planning. And economic planning, my point of view, is the historical form of socialism nowadays in the world. The people, there is economic planning in the United States, there is economic planning in Germany, there is economic planning in France, but the economic planning in China is other thing, is other, as I spoken before, China when China use the platforms like 5G and artificial intelligence, the big data, when used to the real economy, put in works to the real economy, China achieved higher and superior forms of economic planning. This is the great transformation in Chinese economy nowadays is on the economic planning. The people in Brazil answer to me about when China will abolish the private property, when China will reach a socialist, developed socialism. This is not a question for our time. When China will abolish the private property, because the socialism in Marx is the overcoming of social division of labor. But when I observe China in the concrete, China is far away to overcome the social division of labor. For example, the difference between the camp and city in China is very great. 500 million people working in a petty commodity production in China, agriculture. The half people in China is not employed in industrial jobs, industrial works. Another question, another thing on economic planning that I want to bring here. China now, the project-based planning opened the possibility to a Copernican revolution in dynamics of Chinese industrialization. I will show now two important features of the project-based planning and the new project-based economy. I think that in the first time in the history, China opened the conditions to open a process to overcome the Keynesian uncertainty. Wow, the Keynesian uncertainty is the core of a capitalist economy. The capitalist economy works influenced by the Keynesian uncertainty. And China, with the state-owned companies in the center, and the financial system, the state control, and a lot of institutions like SAAC, the SASAC, a lot of institutions open conditions to overcome in the future this characteristic of capitalism economies, the Keynesian uncertainty. Other thing that I want to bring here to discuss in another day, in other moment. The China create the conditions to planning what the Schumpeter named of creative destruction. Everybody knows about the social cost of the creative destruction. China created conditions to planning this problem, this contradiction. For example, yesterday I changed ideas here with Michael Roberts and Sun Ki. China exists today in China more or less 2 million people. 2 million people concentrated in planning the economy. The people wake up morning, have a lunch and dinner, thinking in overcoming the next contradiction that will appear in China. This is a good explain for why China continue to generate 13 million urban employees by year. Even your economic growth dropped from 80% to 90% until now to 6%. When China, the economic growth of China was the 8%, China generated 30 million jobs, urban jobs by year. The economic growth now is 6%, and China continue to generate 30 million people. This is how we can explain that. This is the planning of creative destruction.
Yeah.
The older phases of socialism in China. This is a historical form of socialism. To finish, Sun Ki put a question, a very good question about the impact of the world of Chinese model. I think there is a subjective dominion by imperialism in Western. For example, the Marxists in Brazil, 90% Brazil, classify China as a capitalist economy. It's not socialist. When you call that experience as a capitalism, you close your head, you close your mind to real transformations and real possibilities to world that experience open to humankind. So my reply to your questions is that China, yes, show to the world and show to Latin America, to the Hugo Chavez, Evo Morales, and Lula da Silva, there is alternative to financialization. Okay, but it's a very good, beautiful, but it's not possible here. Okay, because China is a dictatorship, China is a state capitalist, China is not a model of, there is an incomprehensive, very incomprehensive about Chinese model here. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Jabbour. I know that there are a few questions we still need to answer, but I would like to invite Dick Low to just raise his comment or questions because I have a mute. I can see that you would like to speak. So Dick, please, can you
hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. Now in the presentation, it's highlighted that Brazil and the LAC region in general has been suffering from the trend of primarization or even deindustrialization. Now the big question is, what have caused this trend and what is the role of China thereof? Now, should we just focus on the appearance, that is the superficial phenomenon of the structures of bilateral trade with China and the characteristics of the China's FDI in the regions? Now, conceptually, focusing on market exchange and market competition could be misleading, both in terms of ascertaining the real causes of the deindustrialization in the LAC today, or in terms of understanding the nature of imperialism historically. Now, as political economists, Marxists or otherwise, or structuralists, we need to focus on the issues of the creation and utilization of investable surplus. And in this regard, the question would then come down to what has been the performance of productive investments in Brazil and in the LAC region in general, and what is the role of China thereof. Specifically, the question is, what has been the movement of the terms of trade with China, and where have the income from the China trade and China investment gone? Where have they been utilized in productive investments for industrialization and therefore getting out of the trend of deindustrialization? Thank you. That's my question.
Thank you. Thank you, Dick. Professor Jabbour, I just wanted to read out the questions in the Q&A box as well. Or do you want to respond to Dick first?
I will reply the Professor Diclo question. Okay. Professor Diclo, I believe that the economic dynamics don't explain the cause of the reprimarization of Brazilian economy. We have a political and institutional problem that impeded our industrialization. For example, Brazil had an investment rate between 18% during a lot of years, because we have in Brazil an institution named inflation targets. And these inflation targets is annually. and the central bank use the interest rate to combating the inflation in Brazil. Então, every year, Brazil need to deliver to the central bank must be deliver an inflation target between 4% per year. This is possible to us making commerce with China with these institutional approaches in Brazil. For example, the central bank Brazil have one unique mandate to stabilize the price. The central bank Brazil don't need to elaborate a program to employment in Brazil, to industrialization in Brazil. So, in my point of view, the principal cause of reprimarization of our economy is not China, was our historical choices and the institutional framework that Brazil, the Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff can't overcome during their mandates. In this point, I prefer speaking more than our problems than the Chinese, the role of China to our reprimarization. Of course, exists the problem of inflow of dollar of exportation and the relationship with that to evaluation of the Brazilian exchange rate, for example. This is a Chinese problem, né? But I think that our problem is not Chinese exports, the role of China, but the Brazilian institutions and our framework institution, a neoliberal institution. Not I don't believe the China, the political problem, not economic problem caused by Chinese exports. Okay?
Yeah, I would just add to what Professor Jabbour says on that if we go back to before 2000, when China came into the World Trade Organization and dramatically expanded its manufacturing export trade to all countries. If we go back before that, if we go into the 20th century, all the Latin American countries are already moving away from developing their industry and technology to becoming raw material exporters for the global north. And the terms of trade between Latin America and the global north, particularly the United States, was much more important and dangerous for the development of Latin American industry, employment, and so on. That it's become, I mean, Mexico is probably the worst example of this, in a way in which Mexico is basically a state that's used for location by US industry to export back into the US, particularly in the north part of Mexico. But Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Mexico, these countries have become dependent and playing a peripheral role of raw material exporters for the global north and the United States before China entered the scene. The fact that China has become a major manufacturing and now trading partner with Latin America is, as Professor says, doesn't mean that it's become an exploitive part of the process like the imperialist powers, but because of the weakness of the development in Latin America, naturally that bad division of trade is taking place. Yes, it's probably making the situation to some extent worse. On the other hand, China is the main export destination of many of these countries. Without China's growth and its demand for raw materials and primary goods, Latin America would be even worse situation given their current domestic industrial structure. They would have to change that if they want to have a different approach. And so it seems to me the argument that's going to be presented that this is damaging to Latin America is in the same argument we would present that it's Latin America is too weak. It's not developing. It's not a developing region, even on a capitalist basis. And therefore, that's the problem that Latin America faces, not the fact that it doesn't have a manufacturing balance with countries of global north or China itself. So it will be wrong. I think one of the reasons that we have a growing US-China battle is precisely because China is now becoming much more important as a trading partner in places like Latin America, in Africa and so on. And this is dangerous to the ability of imperialism to maintain its share of the market, of investment, and for its extraction of profits and other income as a result. China is becoming an obstacle. And that is probably the more significant factor of the Chinese relationship with Latin America.
I want to continue to reply 1 minute for Dick Low. Professor Dick, can you hear me?
Yes, I can
Yes,
hear
he
you.
can hear you.
Professor Dick, one day for you. Do you know what the great debate in Brazil now, during the pandemic? The great debate now in Brazil, in press and academic circles is Brazil must to come back to structural adjust after the pandemic.
You must restructure after the pandemic.
No, other question. Brazil must open more your market to competition with other countries. This is the in the media and academic circles. In this point, I put a question: what China role in this question? Nothing. Brazil, the Brazilian mind, the Brazilian government, the Brazilian academicians thinking in new classes terms in economy.
Yes.
This is the problem. I am a Marxist and developmentalist. The developmentalist thinking in Brazil now represents more or less 10% of academical thinking in Brazil. The strong of neoliberal thinking in Brazil is very, very great. And I repeat what I put before. Brazil is a case of study because Brazil is the unique country in the world where the neoliberal ideas have an open room to understand is dominant. Is the only country in the world where where now the debate is on when we come back to the structural adjust, when we come back to open more our economy. This is a political problem of our country in relationship with China. China is not the problem. China is export the products. We have a interest rate very now is devaluated, but problematic. We have institutional problem in Brazil. We need another institutional framework to developmentalist project. I'm very glad to know you here, Professor Dick Low. I read your articles in the last 15 years. I read all your articles about China. You were a great reference to me in my studies, like Michael Roberts, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jabbour. I know that we have overrun the workshop today, and I don't know if you wanted to answer the last questions or just maybe quickly from the perspective of Brazil, how they value BRI and the America crease. Do you have a quick reply to this one?
Can you repeat, please?
Yeah, from the perspective of Brazil, how they value Belt and Road Initiative and the America crease. I think that is the American growth in Latin America.
It's incredible, incredible. Brazil don't sign the Belt and Road Initiative. Brazil is out of Belt and Road Initiative. Brazil is out of. In truth, in Brazilian government have a struggle between two lines. One line is the Bolsonaro line that wants to align with United States, is a pro-American, pro-imperialist government, but the vice presidents want to more close with with China. Have a struggle in Brazil today. But the trend now is not Brazil, the 5G don't enter in Brazil, the Belt and Road don't enter in here. Brazil is out of Belt and Road Initiative. And now the Argentina will sign a deal with China to enter the Belt and Road Initiative, and China will take our market, our unique market for our manufactured products is Argentina. The Argentina substitutes Brazil by China in manufactured importations, for example. Brazil loses the Argentina market now to China because we are very, Brazil not, we don't think in commercial and strategic terms. You think in pro-imperialist terms. Very bad.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Elias. So Dick was asking the question, so the Brazilian elite wants to have further neoliberalization after the pandemic. I think your answer is yes.
Yes.
Yeah, this is quite clear, and it's worrying as well. I think we should end our session now, even though there are questions still coming through, and I'm sure this is a topic with a lot of interest and debate will go on. We will think about how to continue this very important subject, but again, thank you very much for your participation today, and our special thanks to our two speakers, Professor Elias Jabbour and Michael Roberts. For people who are interested in our workshop, I recommend you to follow us on the Eventbrite channel, so that you can be notified of our future event. So before we finish, is there any conclusion or last word from both of our speakers today?
I'd just like to thank Professor Jabbour for opening up a whole range of questions, which I can see that people are just beginning to digest and may well want to discuss further. And I'm sure Elias and I will be discussing further on this. And if we do have another discussion, perhaps we can also get participation from everybody. But it's just, we've started a very important discussion, particularly right now with China and US in a major international struggle over the next decade or so. So it's very important. A small number of participants today, we need wider discussion of this because it's probably the issue of the 21st century.
Professor Dicklow put a question, so the Brazilian elite want to have further the neoliberalism after the pandemic? Yes, Dicklow, Professor. Our elite want to further the neoliberalism after the pandemic. I want to thank you too much by this opportunity to expose my thinking on China's and market socialism and Brazil-China relation. I want to continue our dialogue. Professor Dicklow, Professor Michael Roberts, and Sun Ki. Sun Ki and me have changed ideas on Chinese socialism. I have read her article, a very, very good article in Radical Review, and I used in my studies. I want to come back and let's try to meet during the week, once a week or once 15 days to discuss China socialism. I want to know more Michael Roberts think about socialism. I want to be very close to the people like Michael Roberts, Sun Ki and Dicklow to understand better China. Thank you too much. I want to back.
Okay, thank you.
Well done with the English, Professor. Well done in English.
Yes.
Our Portuguese is no good.
I will do a confession now, okay? During a lot of time, during my life, 10 years, 15 years, I don't want to understand English because the imperialist language. Yeah?
So is Portuguese. So Portuguese is also imperialist. It's just an older and smaller one.
Yes, but now I know I must improve my English, and now was a great opportunity for that. I was better than I expected in this case.
We got another hand up in the attendees. I don't know if you guys have a few minutes to spare to let Pat Bain to talk.
Yeah.
Okay, Pat. Do you want to unmute yourself and just quickly, because we have been extending this session. Yes, Pat, you are here with us now. Can you?
I know, no. That's okay for me.
Okay, right. I think maybe he put the hand up by mistake then, because he has been unmuted, but he hasn't said anything. So I think we will end our session today now. Thank you again. So we will continue the discussion in other channels or in our next workshop. Thank you. Bye.